Hey everybody, welcome back to the vlog. So once again, it is tea time and it's another Sony day. Why? Because you guys want it to be, right?
3, 2, 1, 0.
So I did the video a couple of days back on the Sony A7RIII. I talked about its specs and God, you guys, there's got to be like 8,000 views and just hundreds of comments on that video. And I want to kind of get into some of those comments. And one of them was really kind of interesting to me. And I thought about it and I looked at the specs and I think I agree with this person. The question was, does the A7RIII cannibalize the A9? Now, you probably guessed my answer back here by this image, but it's not about me and what I think. It's about what you think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the specs and I'm going to compare like A, B on the two cameras and see how they fare, right? What are you getting for your extra $1,300 for the A9? So let's jump into it real quick. Now, the very first thing is the actual pixels, right? The pixels on the sensor, not megapixels, but the pixels, the micron size. So the A9 has a 6 micron size pixel, whereas the A7RIII has a 4.5 micron. So what is the difference? Well, a larger pixel captures more light and you will end up with less noise in low light. So the A9 should be, on spec, should be better in low light by a little bit. Next, you have the anti-aliasing, the AA filter. In the A9, it has an AA filter, whereas in the A7RIII, it doesn't. What is the difference? If you have an AA filter, okay, you're going to have less, let's call it reduced moire, okay? In the A7RIII that doesn't have it, you are going to be afforded probably sharper images. Okay. Next, the A9 will shoot up to 20 frames per second. Now that is with the electronic shutter, whereas the A7RIII will only shoot 10 frames per second. Now, that's also with electronic shutter. Where it differs is in the mechanical shutter. The A9 will only be able to shoot 5 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, whereas the A7RIII will be able to hit double that, 10 frames per second with a mechanical shutter. So if you're shooting something like sports or you're shooting a wedding and you need flash, you're going to need the mechanical shutter, and being able to shoot up to 10 frames per second is definitely beneficial over 5. Now moving into raw capture. The A9 will capture up to 240 raw images before having to buffer. That is a ton, guys. That is a big buffer. Whereas the A7RIII will only capture 72 images before having to buffer. The question is, do you need 240 shots before the camera buffers? I don't know. For me, I will never shoot that much. I am personally not a spray and pray kind of guy. I really get the image just the way I want it, and then I take that shot, period. Now, if you're a sports guy, we know that a lot of times you're having to motor through a ton of images to be able to capture just before the catch, let's say, and then just after the catch, and then see which of your images are the best for going to press. And I understand that. So at that point, maybe that 240 raw images consecutively, right, before buffering is beneficial. Next, megapixels. The A9 shoots on a 24 megapixel sensor, whereas the A7RIII shoots on a 42 megapixel sensor, almost double. Now, like we were talking about before, microns. Yes, you are with a 6 micron size on the A9 in comparison to a 4.5, but remember, you're getting double the number of pixels on that A7RIII. In most situations, I always go for larger pixels because they're normally better. In this situation, if, for example, I'm a portrait shooter, I would probably want to go with that 42 megapixels, especially like, for example, for fashion. And I'm having to do a lot of pixel pushing, okay? I like to have more megapixels, good megapixels, of course. Now, one other thing, shutter speed. the A9 will shoot up to 1/32,000th of a second, whereas the A7RIII will only go up to 1/8,000th of a second. Now, what is the difference? For me, I can't see anyone needing to shoot at 1/32,000th of a second unless you're trying to capture lightning striking or some type of really fast moving action. Okay, so will the 1/32,000th of a second be that big of a deal in comparison to 1/8,000th of a second? I'm going to say no. Okay, but it might be to the top 1 percentile, or maybe even a 0.5% of photographers that need that shutter speed that the A9 does afford you. So now those were some of the differences. What are the similarities? What are the same between the two? Now, number one, you have focus peaking. Both of them have it. You have in-camera image stabilization. Both of them have that. That's awesome. You have 4K. They both shoot 4K video. You have a touchscreen on both. You have a tilt screen on both. Now remember, neither of them have a swivel tilt. So for a vlogger like me, I really can't use either of the cameras. Now, you also have Wi-Fi, you have NFC, you have Bluetooth in both. You have an external mic in both. You have HDMI out in both. You have headphone jacks in both. Both of them have dual cards, a UHS-1 as well as a UHS-2. Nothing different there. Those are all the same. So for me, I think the $1,300 between the A9 and the A7 is just simply not worth it. I think that the top 1 or 2 percentile of photographers that are going to need an A9 over the A7R2 is not enough for Sony to not have cannibalized their A9 line here. I really do believe that anyone that looks at these specs are going to immediately opt for an A7R3. And you know what, guys? My suggestion to you would be take the $1,300 difference between the A7R3 and the A9 and spend it on one of Sony's fancy professional G Master line lenses that are basically as good as any Nikon lens, as good as any L glass on the Canon side. They are superb lenses. Take that $1,300 and buy yourself a lens and strap it on to that A7R3. So for me, I really do believe that Sony has cannibalized their A9 flagship with this A7R3. That's my personal opinion, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that's the case or do you not? Do you think that the A9 is worth the extra $1,300? Or if you were purchasing this camera today, would you go with the A7R3 and maybe purchase some glass like I suggested? I want to hear from you. In the comment area below, let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit because Sony is really big in the news right now, and rightfully so. They're doing a lot of things right and they're iterating really fast, guys. That's one other thing that it's something that you guys need to think about. Is the iteration of Sony's cameras so quick that it's also hurting the line at this point? When you have Nikon and Canon taking sometimes 1.5 years or 2 years to come out with new cameras like the D850, right? Is this speed in which that Sony is coming out with new cameras hurting them, okay? By people saying, God, I don't really want to get involved just yet because there's going to be a new one out in 6 months, right? Do I really want to go spend $3,200 to go spend $3,200 again in 6 months or 8 months? I don't know. So anyways, this is a little conversation I want to have with you guys. Put your thoughts in the comment area below. And don't forget, if you enjoy my content, throw me a big thumbs up. That would be awesome. Smash that subscribe button so you can get all my content when it becomes available. And turn on your notifications. So when the content does become available, you'll get notification of it immediately. And very importantly, please share the videos with your community so we get more traction and we get some more feedback and comments down below. Finally, head over to my website, JCristina.com, where you can find a lot of photography tools that I've invented for photographers just like you. That's it for another vlog. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.